How do you positively influence others in the workplace? You know, we spend 90,000 hours during our life in the workplace. We need to be able to make it as positive an experience as possible. During this video, I'm going to teach you 5 different ways to remain positive and to influence others in a positive way in the workplace. You know, we spend 90,000 hours in the workplace during our lives, and yet the latest surveys about how we feel in the workplace is a little disturbing. 60% of people claim to be anxious, claim to be overwhelmed, claim that the pace of change is too much. And what's more, people say that the workplace is not a positive environment. Today, I want to share with you 5 different ways that we can influence the workplace in a positive direction. So the first thing is that you have more power than you think you do, because we have the power to set the tone. You know, very often we can feel helpless in the workplace, and yet we know from advances in research and emotional intelligence that we actually have the power to set the tone. Very often we think of the workplace as a set of different relationships. I have a relationship with the other person, I have a relationship with this person and that person. But in reality, what it is this complex web. It's a system. And that's important because what happens to one person impacts every other person in the system. What we also know from some research is that our emotions are shared. We have something called an emotional system. And it's an open system. What does that mean? That means it's not closed. That means it's open to influence from the outside, and also we influence the outside as well. That's why when you walk down the street and you see a baby crying, your heart is moved and you want to do something because we have that open system. It's a winning strategy for survival. It meant that when we were in need, others could respond to our need, and we survived as a human species. Well, in the workplace, it's also important because there's such a phenomenon known as emotional contagion. Yep, you got it right, emotional contagion. We literally catch the emotions of other people. Now, there's experiments being done where 2 people, they have a 15-minute conversation, and if you measure all their vital signs, what happens after 15 minutes is that both of them begin to sync. Their heartbeats become the same, their breathing becomes the same. And so it is with our emotions. Now, as leaders or managers, our impact can be even more significant. We know that when leaders come into the office, everyone is looking to take their tone from that leader. Meetings, leaders often speak before everyone else, speak much more, and even when they're not present, their presence is acknowledged or their absence is acknowledged. And so we take our emotional cues from each other. So one other little piece of research is also interesting. Our positive emotional contagion is more powerful than our negative emotional contagion. Now that's good news. That means that if we come into the workplace and we are sowing emotions of positivity, of happiness, of can-do attitude, then those emotions spread quicker around the organization. You know, Daniel Goleman, who's one of the real thought leaders when it comes to emotional intelligence, uses this amazing image. He talks about each and every day in the workplace where we're creating this cauldron, this big pot of soup, and everyone is pouring in the emotional sauce that they are bringing. The leader's emotional sauce is a little bit more profound and deeper than others. But the question we all should ask is, what am I bringing to this emotional soup that we are making today? You know, I saw this really significantly during my first job. I got a job in the Foreign Office in the United Kingdom, and it was this big Victorian building. And I remember that I was told that if I was going to be successful, that I needed to know Sally in the front, because Sally, who was the receptionist, knew everything that was happening. And I remember as a young man trying to strike up a relationship And I was a little clumsy and I didn't know what to say. And eventually, anyway, I think I have made it because one day I walk in and she goes with her thumb up. And I remember asking myself, what does that mean? And then I had a friend there and I asked, and I said, look, I think I've got it in with Sally, but I'm not quite sure if I have. And he said, well, what are you seeing? He said, when I walked in this morning, she did this. And he said, oh, you're in. I said, what is it? He said, it's her early warning system. I said, what's an early warning system? He says, well, when she does this, it means that the boss has come in a good mood. And when she does this, it means the boss has come in a bad mood. Later, I kind of got the colloquial language we use. This was a medicated day. This was an unmedicated day. But one of the things that I saw was the influence of this in the workplace. Because on days when the thumb was up, when you walked through the office, the doors were open, people laughed, there was communication. In days like this, when the thumb was down, the doors were shut, there was silence, no laughter, people kept to themselves. It was as if these emotions had spread like wildfire across the organization. And such is the impact of emotional contagion. So if you want to make the workplace a little more positive, begin to sow seeds of positivity, because that tone can impact not just the person you're talking to, but the whole organization. The second skill to use if you want to positively influence the workplace is the ability to listen. I often think there's a hunger in the world, and the hunger is not just for food. The hunger is truly to be listened to. So often our work days is full of so much chatter, and at times we truly forget to stop and to listen completely to another person. And here's what happens when you truly stop and listen as if your life depended on it to another person, is that it feels different. It creates this positivity because a person has been acknowledged and listened to. I love the quote by Maya Angelou. She says, at the end, people will not remember the words you use, they will remember how you made them feel. And by listening completely, intently, as if there is no one else in the room, we begin to make people feel that they truly matter. And this creates a whole wave of positivity to the extent that we can do it. The third area is to create calm in the midst of chaos. We know that our workplaces are crazy at times. They're full of tight deadlines, constant change, and people are carrying around with them this constant anxiety. Our ability to remain calm in the midst of this chaos can positively impact the rest of the workforce. We know from emotional contagion that people are constantly looking at leaders and managers, and their mood feeds through the rest of the organization. So that if we get to a situation where there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, and we come in and add to that, increase the anxiety, then what we're doing is really adding to that. What we want to try and do is disturb that, to kind of step people down, to help them come down to greater calmness. And so remaining calm in the midst of that can sow real positive seeds in the workplace. So the fourth area is greater self-awareness. The more self-aware we are, the more aware of what emotions we're feeling in the moment, the more that we're able to identify our particular triggers, the more that we're able to identify moments when we're moving into emotion. And so our ability to stop perhaps some negativity or some emotional outburst that will not be helpful is dependent on a really solid base of our self-awareness. If you want to learn a little bit more about self-awareness, watch this video, which talks in detail about self-awareness and how to develop it. And finally, we need to be careful of what we are bringing to work from home. We think that it's sometimes work is here and home is here, but in reality, when it comes to our emotional lives, there is not this fine barrier. And so what we have to do is just be careful that we are aware of what emotions we are bringing to work. Perhaps something is upsetting us at home. Perhaps things are not going their way. We have to be able to acknowledge that, and also before we enter work, to be able to manage that so that we are not bringing it to work and absolutely sowing seeds of that all around us. So often what happens is that people have very little ability to manage some of those emotions, and what we're seeing at work is this inability and this emotional contagion from some of the negative emotions that are happening outside of the workplace. And so therefore just a simple practice perhaps of before you go to work every day, of just to acknowledge what emotions are you carrying and what do you need to manage so that it isn't influencing in a negative way those around you at work. The reality is we have more power to influence our workplace than we think about. We have the power to set the tone. You know, very often one of the things that really gets in the way of being positive in the workplace is conflict. And therefore the next step I want you to do is to watch this video on how to deal with conflict and disagreement with colleagues.